Have you ever wondered what secrets are hidden beneath the cold, stone floors of ancient cathedrals? What becomes of royalty when time itself, not enemies or betrayal, becomes the ultimate conqueror? This is the chilling and unforgettable story of Queen Elizabeth I, not in life, but in death. Elizabeth Tudor, better known as Queen Elizabeth I, was more than just a ruler. She became the symbol of an entire era. Her name commanded respect, admiration, loyalty, and sometimes fear and even hatred. She was Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, and the last monarch of the Tudor dynasty. Her reign lasted for 44 years, and she governed England during a time of rebellion, war, and fierce religious conflict. Elizabeth faced many great threats from within her own kingdom and from across the sea. She defeated King Philip II of Spain and crushed the might of the Spanish Armada. Under her rule, England rose from the ashes of civil strife into a golden age of exploration, art, and empire building. England's power was on the rise. Elizabeth's influence shaped the future of the world. However, despite all her victories and wisdom, Elizabeth was haunted by one inescapable fear. Her body after death. Her reign may have seen her defy the greatest of foes, but she could not escape her greatest fear. What would happen to her once she had passed away? Behind her painted face and magnificent gowns, Elizabeth was a woman terrified of the one thing she could not control: death. She had spent her entire life surrounded by danger, assassins, betrayal, and constant threats. She saw firsthand how quickly queens could fall from power and how family members could become deadly rivals. Even her own cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, had once attempted to steal her throne and paid for it with her life. Elizabeth herself had signed Mary's death warrant, a decision that haunted her deeply. She remained stoic in public, but that choice weighed heavily on her conscience until the end of her life. And yet, more than anything, she feared the fate that awaited her body after her death in the 16th century. Embalming was a brutal, invasive, and violent process. It was not a delicate ritual of respect, as we might think today. The human body was treated as a machine, one that could be taken apart after death. It was a cold and heartless process. When someone died, their body was placed on a stone slab. The flesh was sliced open with long, sharp knives. The organs, including the heart, lungs, liver, and intestines, were removed by hand. These organs were not preserved in a way that would show respect for the deceased. Instead, the empty body was stuffed with strongly scented herbs and spices. Cloves, cinnamon, myrrh, expensive and powerful ingredients were placed inside to mask the stench of decay. These were not added for honor or tradition, but to fight the horrible smell that would soon follow death. And so, even in her final moments, Elizabeth was desperate for her body to be spared such a fate. She begged her doctors and court to leave her body whole, untouched. She wanted to meet her Maker as she had lived, unchanged, unbroken, and untouched. But death is not negotiable, no matter how powerful or wise a queen may be. On March 24, 1603, Queen Elizabeth I passed away. With her death, all her royal commands and protections vanished. The physicians and surgeons who had once followed her orders now carried out what was necessary for embalming. Her body was prepared. For the journey ahead, her chest was opened. Her organs, the heart, which had carried the weight of the kingdom for so many years, were removed. Into the empty cavity went the fragrant herbs and spices, packed tightly to slow the inevitable decomposition. This was not done out of respect for her as a monarch, but to prevent a gruesome disaster during her state funeral. Without this process, her body could have swollen and burst. The pressure of gases building up inside her decaying body could have turned her coffin into a ticking time bomb. Other royal funerals had witnessed similar horrors, where coffins exploded and remains were exposed to the public. The embalmer took no chances with Elizabeth. Once the embalming was complete, Elizabeth's body was wrapped in rich crimson velvet, embroidered with Tudor roses, the symbol of her family. Now in its final moments, she was placed in a heavy, lined coffin. This was not only a symbol of majesty, but a means to contain the decay that could no longer be avoided. The coffin was sealed. The grand funeral procession began, Elizabeth's body was placed on a royal barge, floating down the River Thames. The skies were dark, and the waters were gray, reflecting the mood of the mourners who lined the riverbanks. Thousands stood in silence, watching as their queen made her final journey. But the peaceful scene was not as perfect as it seemed. Those closest to the barge whispered of a strange smell, a sickly sweet odor emanating from the coffin.
Oh.
Even the lead casing could not completely hold back the gases of decay that were already working their way through the body. The air carried the scent of death. Even as the world mourned her passing, had the coffin not held, had the lead cracked or bent under the pressure, the world would have witnessed a horrific moment. Elizabeth's body could have exploded before the eyes of her grieving people, but the coffin held just barely. Elizabeth was buried at Westminster Abbey beneath the heavy stones of the sacred building. Her tomb was magnificent, promising peace and eternal rest. But the silence of her final resting place would not last forever. In the late 1800s, during Queen Victoria's reign, a man named Dean Arthur Stanley was granted permission to explore the royal tombs beneath the abbey. The Victorians were curious, eager to unearth history, and Stanley ventured into the darkness of England's royal resting places. The air was thick with dust and the weight of centuries. Stanley entered the chamber where Elizabeth lay. He did not find a glorious queen at rest. What he found was a coffin that had collapsed under the weight of time. The wood had turned to powder. The once beautiful velvet was now discolored and brittle. The lead, which had been meant to last forever, had bent and warped. Yet even in ruin, the initials ER, Elizabeth Regina, faintly marked the lid, a ghostly echo of the woman who had once commanded the might of an empire. Above her coffin lay the remains of her half-sister, Mary the First in life. The two women had been bitter rivals. Their struggle for the crown had torn England apart in fire and blood. But in death, they were forever locked together. The air in the chamber was thick with centuries of decay. Elizabeth and Mary lay side by side, enemies in life but neighbors for eternity. Time had done its work. Elizabeth's body, embalmed with such care, had not decayed in peace. Gases continued their slow destruction. The coffin bulged unnaturally, and the velvet covering was stained. The wood had disappeared, yet in the ruins, fragments of her identity remained. The Tudor rose, the faded embroidery. A weighty legend, still lingering in the dust. Above ground, the world had moved on. Tourists strolled across the polished floors of Westminster Abbey, unaware of the scene beneath their feet. They admired the beauty, the grandeur, and the elegance. But beneath the marble and stone lay a different story, one of decay, rot, and time's unforgiving grip. Beneath the beautiful tomb, Elizabeth's coffin lay bloated and fragile, still. Housing the remains of a queen who once ruled the seas and outwitted kings, her tomb was more than a monument. It was a message carved not in stone, but in time, a reminder that even the greatest rulers must surrender to the earth. Velvet fades, lead bends. Flesh, no matter how royal, turns to dust. Her legacy lives on in books, in paintings, and in the stories of an era she helped shape. But her body, once dressed in gold and wrapped in the power of her kingdom, now rests in darkness, broken, forgotten by most, consumed by the steady, patient march of time. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who commanded armies, defeated enemies, and shaped history, now lies in silence. In pieces, time is the ultimate ruler, and not even a queen can outlast its reign.